Her dog wouldn't stop pawing the hearth until one stone sounded wrong. The garage had no windows, just concrete cardboard boxes and the low hum of a space heater she wasn't supposed to run too long. At 72, Lucinda Hale had signed her home into a family trust and trusted her son to protect her. Months later, she was sleeping beside lawn tools until a certified letter sent her and her German shepherd north to a silent log cabin, where one loose stone changed everything. If you were in her place, would you have opened that stone or walked away? The garage didn't have windows. Lucinda Hale noticed that the first night. No crack of moonlight, no sliver of dawn. Just a thin line of yellow from the overhead bulb Derek forgot to turn off, humming faintly above the lawn tools. She lay on a narrow camping mattress beside stacked storage bins labeled Christmas and tax files. The concrete beneath it still held the heat of the day. Mesa summers didn't cool quickly. They lingered. They pressed. Atlas lay across her ankles, his weight steady, warm. Every time a car door shut outside, his ears lifted. Every time a voice rose inside the house, his head turned toward the connecting door. He hadn't liked the move. She hadn't either. 8 months earlier, she had still lived in her own ranch house 2 miles away. The one with the citrus tree in the backyard. The one her husband, Martin, had painted himself every 5 years whether it needed it or not. After Martin's heart gave out, the silence in that house became heavy. Derek had come over almost every evening then, sat at her kitchen table, drank iced tea, spoke gently. "Mom, you don't need to worry about paperwork, or taxes, or probate. Let me handle it." He had printed documents, explained the protective trust, said it would prevent legal headaches, said it would protect her from scams, said it was temporary. She remembered how the pen felt in her hand, how her signature looked slightly shaky. She hadn't read every line. She trusted her son. Now her house belonged to the trust, and the trust belonged to Derek. Inside the house that used to feel like family, voices carried easily through the thin interior walls. Lucinda could hear them clearly from the garage. "It's just too much," her daughter-in-law Brianna said one evening. The words sharp, precise. "The electric bill jumped again, and she runs that space heater all night." Lucinda stared at the ceiling, though there was nothing to look at. "It's a garage," Derek replied. "It's not insulated." "Well, that's not my fault." Atlas shifted. A low sound rolled from his chest. Not loud, just enough. Lucinda reached down and pressed her palm into the thick fur at his neck. "It's all right," she whispered. But it wasn't. The first week in the garage, Derek had called it temporary. Just until they figured things out. The mattress was supposed to be a short-term solution. Then the bed frame from the guest room disappeared. Then the dresser. Then the framed photos she had placed carefully on the small folding table. One afternoon, she found her winter coats sealed in a contractor trash bag. "Storage," Brianna had said. Lucinda had stopped asking questions. Atlas never stopped watching. He followed her every time she stepped into the house to use the bathroom. Sat outside the kitchen doorway during dinner but was never invited to lie down. His body stayed tight, eyes alert. Once, when Brianna's voice rose unexpectedly, Atlas barked sharply. Derek had slammed his palm on the table. "That dog needs training." Lucinda had stood then, quietly, took Atlas by the collar, walked back to the garage without speaking. That was the night she began to understand something she hadn't wanted to see. The garage didn't smell like home. It smelled like gasoline, dust, and hot rubber. The air was dry, heavy. She kept a small fan running for circulation. It rattled on its base. On the third Thursday of that month, she woke before sunrise. The house was quiet. Atlas still asleep, chin resting on her foot. She heard Derek's voice through the door. "We can't keep doing this," Brianna answered. "I've already called. They have a place off Main. It's not fancy, but it's affordable." A pause. "She'll be around people her age," Brianna continued. "Activities, supervised." Lucinda felt the concrete through the mattress. "She won't need the dog there," Brianna added. "They don't allow large breeds." There was another pause, a longer one. "Yeah," Derek said finally. "That might be best." Best. Atlas stirred, sensing the shift in her breathing. He lifted his head slowly and looked at her. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Something inside her, some small, stubborn warmth she'd carried since Martin died, went quiet. Not broken, just quiet. For a long time she stared at the garage door, at the metal panels, at the seams where light leaked in during the afternoon. She tried to remember what it felt like to sit on her own porch, to water her plants without asking permission, to open her refrigerator and not feel like she was borrowing space. Atlas stood and stepped closer, pressing his chest into her shoulder. "I know," she murmured. The voices inside the house continued. Mortgage, utilities, space. She closed her eyes. The garage had no windows, but she was still awake, and Atlas was still watching. The bulb overhead flickered once, then steadied. Lucinda rolled onto her side, facing the door that separated her from the house she once believed would always feel like family. She listened. She memorized the sound of their conversation, and she stopped waiting for it to change. Atlas lowered his head beside hers, eyes open, ears forward. Neither of them slept again before morning. By the time the sky began to pale behind the thin seam of the garage door, Lucinda was already sitting upright. Atlas stood beside her, stretched once and shook himself, tags clicking softly. Inside the house, the coffee machine gurgled. Cabinets opened and closed. Life continued as if nothing had shifted. Lucinda folded the thin blanket neatly and placed it on top of the storage bin. She moved quietly, the way you do in someone else's space. The knock on the side door startled Atlas first. He froze, ears high. Lucinda opened the garage door halfway and stepped into the driveway. A delivery truck idled at the curb. The driver held out a clipboard. Lucinda Hale? Her name sounded strange in the morning air. She signed. The pen pressed harder than she meant it to. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, certified. Atlas followed her back inside the garage. She sat on the mattress and turned the envelope over in her hands. The return address read, Finch and Garrow, Attorneys at Law, Hamilton, Montana. Montana. She hadn't been there in 40 years. Inside, the house door opened. "What's that?" Derek asked from the doorway. His tie was already on. He hadn't shaved yet. "Just mail," Lucinda replied. He stepped into the garage without asking and took the envelope from her hand. "Certified?" he said. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything." He tore it open. Atlas stood up slowly. Not aggressive, just watchful. Derek scanned the page. His eyebrows rose. "Well," he said, letting out a short laugh. "That's interesting." Lucinda waited. "Remember Cousin Raymond, from your dad's side?" She blinked. Vaguely. "He died." Silence. And apparently, Derek continued, flipping the page over, he left you something. What? A cabin, some land, 47 acres outside some place called Darby, Montana. Lucinda felt the word land in her chest like a stone dropped into water. A cabin? She repeated. Brianna appeared behind him, arms crossed. Montana? She said. What would you do with a cabin in Montana? Derek read further. Free and clear, no liens, no outstanding taxes, travel expenses covered. Brianna laughed lightly. Sounds like a horror movie. Lucinda reached for the letter. Derek hesitated, then handed it over. The words were formal, legal, clear. Raymond Hale, deceased, estate finalized, sole beneficiary, Lucinda Hale. She tried to picture Raymond. Thin face, quiet at family funerals, always standing slightly apart. She remembered him watching conversations more than participating in them. I haven't spoken to him in decades, she murmured. Well, Derek said, folding his arms, people do strange things when they get old. Atlas leaned against her knee. Brianna stepped further into the garage, heels clicking. You can't actually be thinking about going out there, she said. Mom, you don't even like cold weather. I didn't say I was going. But you're thinking it, Derek replied. Lucinda looked down at the paper again. 47 acres. No mortgage. No utilities complaints. No space heater arguments. It's probably falling apart, Brianna continued. These old cabins? No plumbing? No insulation? Probably mice. Derek nodded. We could handle it for you. Sign it over to the trust. I'll list it. Whatever it's worth, we split it. It'll help with expenses. Atlas's tail stopped moving. Lucinda looked up slowly. Expenses, she repeated. Derek shrugged. Yeah, you know. She thought of the mattress behind her, the storage bins, the way Brianna's voice sharpened when talking about electricity. I'd like to see it, Lucinda said. Brianna blinked. See it? Just look. Derek shook his head. Mom, that's ridiculous. It's across the country. It says travel is covered. That doesn't mean you should go. Lucinda stood up. Atlas moved with her. I'd like to see it, she said again, quieter this time. Firmer. Brianna exhaled sharply. So, you're just going to what? Run off to the mountains? It's not running, Lucinda replied. Derek's jaw tightened. You can't just leave. Lucinda didn't answer that. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. For the rest of the day, no one mentioned assisted living. No one mentioned utilities. But the air shifted. That evening, Derek approached her in the garage. If you go, he said, don't expect us to rescue you when it falls apart. She looked at him steadily. I'm not asking to be rescued. Atlas stepped between them without being told. Derek glanced down at the dog and walked back inside. Lucinda packed that night. She didn't have much left to pack. 2 suitcases, a box of photographs she had quietly retrieved from storage weeks ago, Martin's old flannel shirt. Atlas's leash hung on a hook near the side door. Before dawn, when the house was still asleep, she loaded the SUV. The engine coughed twice before turning over. She didn't leave a note. She didn't slam the door. She simply backed out of the driveway and turned left instead of right. Atlas settled into the passenger seat, eyes forward. Mesa's streetlights faded behind them. The sky ahead was still dark. Lucinda kept both hands on the wheel. She did not look back. The sky over Mesa was still charcoal when Lucinda reached the highway. A faint blush of orange waited behind the mountains, but the city lights were still on, glowing soft and indifferent. Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, front paws planted wide, nose pointed toward the windshield. He had always liked car rides, but this one felt different. He didn't settle, didn't curl up. He stayed alert, as if they were moving through something unseen. Lucinda merged onto the freeway. The tires hummed. The road opened wide in front of her. For the first hour, she drove in silence. The air outside was warm and dusty. Saguaro silhouettes passed like sentinels. She watched the familiar landmarks slip away. Strip malls, gas stations, a billboard for senior living that made her grip the wheel tighter. Atlas shifted when she did. "Just us," she said softly. By mid-morning, the desert flattened out into endless tan. She rolled the window down slightly. Hot wind rushed in, carrying the smell of dry earth and creosote. She stopped in Flagstaff for gas. Atlas jumped out first, stretching his long legs, shaking the tension from his coat. He stayed close while she pumped fuel. A young man glanced at her SUV, then shinned at the large dog standing beside her. "Going far?" he asked casually. "Montana," she replied. He whistled low. "That's a drive." She nodded. It was more than a drive. That first night, she pulled into a rest area in southern Utah. The sun had already dropped behind red rock cliffs, leaving the sky streaked purple and blue. She parked beneath a flickering lamppost and reclined the driver's seat. Atlas climbed into the back, and then, after a moment, returned to the front and lay across her legs. He didn't seem comfortable with distance. Lucinda closed her eyes, but sleep came in pieces. Semi-trucks roared past. Engines idled. Someone laughed too loudly near the vending machines. Each time she stirred, Atlas lifted his head and watched the darkness beyond the glass. In the early hours, she sat up and rubbed her hands together for warmth. The desert had cooled sharply. She reached into the back seat and pulled Martin's flannel shirt over her shoulders. She hadn't planned this far ahead. Only forward. The second day, the land began to change. The flat red earth gave way to rising hills. Pine trees replaced cactus. The air shifted from hot and dry to something sharper, cleaner. She crossed into Idaho by late afternoon. The road narrowed in places, twisting along rivers that flashed silver in the sun. Atlas finally rested his head against the door, eyes half closed, as if he sensed the tension inside her easing inch by inch. She thought about Derek once. Just once. Wondered if he had noticed she was gone yet. If Brianna had walked into the garage and seen the empty mattress. She didn't reach for her phone. By the third morning, frost rimmed the edge of her windshield. Lucinda stepped out into the cold and inhaled. The air smelled like pine sap and river water, crisp, clean. Atlas bounded through a thin layer of snow along the edge of the parking lot, his paws kicking up white powder, tail high. She laughed softly, without meaning to. They drove the final stretch in near silence. The GPS signal faded in and out as she followed Highway 93 north. Mountains rose in the distance, layered in pale blue. The sky seemed wider here, less crowded. When she finally turned onto the gravel road listed in the letter, the tires crunched beneath her. The SUV rocked slightly over ruts and stones. Tall pines pressed in on both sides. their trunks straight and dark. Snow lingered in shaded patches beneath them. Atlas sat upright again, not tense, aware. Lucinda slowed the car. The trees opened into a clearing, and there it was. A log cabin. Solid, weathered. 2 stories with a steep metal roof catching the pale afternoon light. Smoke did not rise from the chimney, but the structure stood straight and grounded, as if it had always belonged to the land. 47 acres of quiet. She cut the engine. The sudden silence rang in her ears. For a moment, she simply sat there, with her hands resting on the steering wheel. Atlas leaned forward, nose twitching. She stepped out first. Gravel shifted under her boots. The air was colder than she expected. It slipped through her jacket sleeves and across her cheeks. Atlas circled once around the SUV, then trotted toward the cabin porch, stopping halfway as if waiting for permission. Lucinda approached slowly. The wood of the cabin door was darkened by age. The porch boards creaked when she stepped on them. The scent of cedar drifted faintly from somewhere inside. She reached into her purse and pulled out the key that had been included in the envelope. It was heavy. Brass. Worn at the edges. Her fingers hesitated just a second before sliding it into the lock. Atlas stood directly beside her leg. The key turned. The door opened with a soft groan. Cold air spilled out. Lucinda stepped inside. The cabin was dim but intact. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A long wooden table stood beneath a window. Shelves lined with books ran floor to ceiling. No dust clouds, no collapse. Just stillness. Atlas padded forward cautiously, nails clicking against wide plank floors. He sniffed the air, moved from corner to corner, then returned and sat near the center of the room. Lucinda closed the door behind them. The outside world fell away. She stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. Not the silence of a garage, not the thin-walled noise of someone else's house. This was different. The cabin seemed to breathe. Atlas finally lowered himself onto the floor and rested his chin on his paws, watching her as if to say, "We're here." Lucinda exhaled. The drive was over. She was not sure what waited next, but she had arrived. Lucinda stood just inside the doorway, her hand still wrapped around the brass key. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and cold ash, like a place that had not been abandoned, only waiting. Atlas stepped forward first. He moved slowly, head low, ears alert, inspecting each corner. His nails clicked softly against the pine floorboards. The sound echoed in the open space. Lucinda closed the door behind her. The metal latch settled with a firm, grounded sound. She let her eyes adjust to the dim light. 2 tall windows faced west, their glass slightly warped with age. Late afternoon sun filtered through pine branches outside, striping the wooden walls in long gold lines. The stone fireplace dominated one wall. It was built from wide, rounded river stones, fitted tightly together. Above it, a heavy wooden mantel held a single iron lantern and a framed photograph turned face down. The furniture was simple. Solid oak table, 4 straight-backed chairs, a leather armchair near the hearth, worn smooth along the arms. Not cluttered, not neglected. Deliberate. Atlas padded across the room, nose working steadily. He sniffed the baseboards, then the stairs leading upward. After a moment, He climbed halfway up, paused, then came back down, as if reporting the second floor safe. Lucinda walked to the nearest window and pressed her palm against the glass. Cold seeped through her skin. Outside, the clearing stretched wide. Snow lingered in shaded pockets. Pines stood tall and quiet, their branches heavy and unmoving. No neighbors, no street noise, no garage door hum. Only wind, faint and distant. She set her purse on the table and moved deeper inside. To the left of the fireplace stood a tall bookcase, each shelf arranged with careful precision. Books sorted by size, spines aligned. A row of ledgers bound in dark leather rested along the bottom shelf. To the right, near the kitchen area, hung a row of tools, each one polished, each one placed exactly parallel. Raymond had been organized. She remembered him as a quiet man at funerals, standing near the back, observing, saying little. Now she stood in the space he had built. Atlas circled once and finally settled near the center of the room, lying down but keeping his head raised, watching her. Lucinda moved into the small kitchen area. A cast-iron stove sat against the wall, clean and ready. A hand pump extended over a deep porcelain sink. She tested it. The pump groaned once, then water sputtered out. Clear, steady. She cupped her hand beneath it and tasted. Cold. Clean. Slightly metallic. Real. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms faced opposite sides of the clearing. The bed frames were sturdy, covered with heavy quilts folded neatly at the foot. The air upstairs held the scent of old wood and wool blankets. She chose the room facing east. Atlas followed, sniffed once around the perimeter, then lay down beside the bed. As if that settled it. Lucinda unpacked slowly. 2 suitcases did not take long. She folded Martin's flannel and placed it at the bottom of the dresser drawer. Set her small framed photographs on the bedside table. When she finished, she stood in the center of the room and listened. The cabin creaked softly as the temperature shifted outside. Wood adjusting, expanding, not alarming. Breathing. As evening approached, the cold deepened quickly. Lucinda gathered kindling from a small stack beside the hearth. The wood was dry, already split and arranged. Raymond had prepared for seasons. She knelt and built the fire carefully. Paper first, then thin sticks, then thicker logs. Atlas watched from a few feet away. When the flame caught, it crackled softly. Orange light dancing across the stone. The warmth spread slowly but steadily. Lucinda lowered herself into the leather armchair and extended her hands toward the heat. The chill left her fingers in waves. Atlas moved closer to the fire, but remained angled toward the door, always positioned between her and the outside. The sun disappeared completely behind the trees. Darkness here was different from Mesa. Not orange with city glow, not humming with distant traffic. This darkness felt layered, deep. She walked back to the front door and opened it briefly. The night air rushed in, sharp and clean. Above her, stars scattered thick across the sky, more than she had seen in years. Atlas stepped onto the porch and stood beside her. His breath puffed in pale clouds. Lucinda pulled her coat tighter. No one raised their voice here. No one calculated her electric usage. The fire behind her popped softly. She stepped back inside and closed the door. The cabin held the warmth. Later, she climbed into bed upstairs. The quilt was heavier than the blanket in the garage had been. She slid beneath it and listened to the wind threading through pine branches. Atlas lay across the doorway threshold, not fully in the room, not fully out. Guarding. Lucinda closed her eyes. The mattress beneath her was firm. Her body ached from the drive, but it was an honest ache. Movement. Effort. Not confinement. Outside, a branch scraped lightly against the roof. The fire below settled into glowing embers. For the first time in months, she did not listen for Derek's voice. She did not brace for Brianna's complaints. She let the quiet surround her. Atlas exhaled once, long and slow. Lucinda drifted into sleep without realizing when it began. She woke to silence. Not the thin, strained quiet of early morning in a suburban neighborhood. Not the hum of refrigerators and distant traffic. This silence was full, layered, the kind that held birdsong inside it. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the rough-hewn ceiling above her and the light filtering through the eastern window. Atlas was already awake. He stood near the window, nose pressed close to the glass, watching something move in the clearing below. When he heard her shift, he turned immediately, tail giving one slow sweep. "Morning," she whispered. He crossed the room and nudged her hand with his muzzle. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Lucinda learned the weight of the hand pump, how many strokes it took before water ran steady. She learned how to stack wood properly so it would dry. She found where Raymond had stored canned goods in neat rows beneath the kitchen counter. She drove into Derby once a week for supplies. The town was small, a hardware store, a diner with a faded red sign, a grocery no larger than a pharmacy back home. People noticed her, and the dog. "New up on Hale Ridge?" one older man asked as she loaded feed into her cart. She nodded. "Just settling in." Atlas stayed at her side, calm but watchful. He accepted the occasional cautious pat from strangers, but never took his eyes off Lucinda. Evenings were the hardest at first. When the sun slid behind the trees and the cabin cooled quickly, she felt the old ache of memory. Martin's laugh, the smell of citrus blossoms in Mesa, the sound of her own kitchen clock ticking. But those moments passed more gently here. The cabin seemed to absorb them. 3 weeks in, the snow began to melt along the edges of the clearing. Pine needles surfaced beneath it, dark and damp. Lucinda spent more time near the fireplace. The hearthstones were wide and solid, shaped by river currents long ago. She liked their texture under her fingertips. That was when Atlas changed. It started subtly. He began lingering near the fireplace longer than usual, not resting, standing. One afternoon, while Lucinda was sorting through one of Raymond's ledgers at the table, Atlas walked to the hearth and scratched once against the stone. She looked up. "Leave it," she said gently. He stopped, but he didn't move away. The next evening, it happened again. This time his scratching was sharper, persistent. His nails clicked against the stone in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Lucinda rose from her chair and walked over. "What is it?" Atlas stepped aside just enough to give her room, then lowered his head and sniffed along a particular section of the hearth. His tail was still, ears forward. She knelt slowly. The stones were cold, smooth in places, rough in others. She pressed her palm against one of them. Nothing. Atlas pawed again, harder. A faint metallic scrape followed the sound. Lucinda leaned closer. There was a subtle difference in tone beneath that one stone, a hollow note she hadn't noticed before. Her pulse shifted. "It's just old construction," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Atlas sat down directly in front of that section of wall. He didn't look at her. He stared at the mortar line. Later that night, when the fire burned low, Atlas returned to the same spot. He began whining softly, not distressed, not frightened, insistent. Lucinda set down her mug and walked over again. "All right," she said quietly. She pressed her fingers against the edges of the stone he had been focused on. The mortar line was slightly uneven there, thinner near the top. She pushed. The stone did not budge. Atlas leaned forward and pressed his nose against the exact center of it. Lucinda pressed harder. Still nothing. She stepped back. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the dog was simply reacting to a scent from years ago. Animals noticed things humans missed, but Atlas did not leave the hearth. He lay down directly in front of it and refused to move. The next morning, he returned to it first thing. No breakfast distraction, no outside patrol. Straight to the stone. Lucinda felt a prickle of unease. Raymond had been precise, organized, intentional. The hearth dominated the room, and Atlas, steady, disciplined Atlas, would not let it go. That afternoon, she ran her fingers carefully along each individual stone. Pressed, tapped. Most were solid, heavy. But when she reached the third stone from the right, about waist height, she felt something shift. Not much. Just the slightest give. Her breath caught. Atlas stood immediately. Lucinda pressed again. The stone depressed inward by a fraction of an inch, then returned to place. A mechanism? Her heart began to thud in her chest. She looked around the room as if expecting someone to be standing there watching. The cabin remained quiet, only wind against the siding. She tried again, applying more pressure this time. The stone moved slightly deeper, and somewhere beneath her feet, she thought she heard the faintest sound. Not a crack, not a snap. Something heavier, a grinding murmur beneath the floorboards. She froze. Atlas stepped back, ears high. The sound stopped. Silence rushed back in. Lucinda swallowed. She stepped away from the hearth and stared at the wide pine floor in front of it. Nothing appeared different, no seam, no visible shift. Her breath felt shallow. She glanced down at Atlas. He was no longer tense. He simply sat there, watching her. The mystery beneath the hearth had begun. And Atlas wasn't done yet. He stood again, slower this time, and stepped back toward the hearth. Not scratching now, just staring at that one stone as if it had spoken to him. Lucinda's heart was still pounding. She walked forward carefully and pressed the stone again. Harder. It moved. Not just a fraction this time. It sank inward with a muted click, mechanical and deliberate. Before she could step back, the floor in front of the fireplace shifted. A low, grinding sound rolled beneath the pine boards. Wood rubbed against wood, something heavy unlocking. Lucinda instinctively grabbed the back of the armchair. A square seam appeared in the floor. Thin at first, then widening. The section of floor, about 4 feet by 4 feet, lifted slightly on one side and slid back with slow precision. Cold air rushed upward. Atlas didn't bark. He didn't growl. He leaned forward and sniffed into the opening. Lucinda's mouth had gone dry. "Raymond," she whispered under her breath. Stone steps descended into darkness. Not rough, not makeshift. Carved cleanly, purposefully. She reached for the lantern on the mantel and lit it with trembling fingers. The flame flickered, then steadied. Atlas stepped onto the first stair without hesitation. "Wait," she said softly. But he didn't retreat. He looked back at her instead, eyes clear. Lucinda placed one hand against the wall and began her descent. The air grew cooler with each step. Not damp, not musty, controlled. When her feet reached the bottom, she lifted the lantern higher. The space opened wide. It was not a cellar. It was a chamber. Vaulted stone ceiling reinforced with thick steel beams running across the top. Along one wall, discreet vents connected to hidden ducts. A faint hum lingered in the background. Soft, steady. Solar power, she realized. The wiring was visible along the upper edges, neatly concealed but intentional. This had been engineered. Crates lined the walls, not random storage. Each wooden crate was numbered, catalogued. Shelving units ran floor to ceiling, holding carefully wrapped paintings stacked upright between protective boards. A long table stood near the center, covered in ledgers and files. Metal lockboxes rested beneath it. Lucinda moved slowly, lantern light gliding across labels written in Raymond's careful handwriting. Bierstadt, Wyeth, Cassat. She didn't recognize all the names, but she knew enough to feel the weight of them. Atlas walked ahead, nose low, but calm. No tension now, no urgency, as if whatever he had sensed above was resolved. Lucinda approached the nearest crate and knelt. Her fingers brushed the lid. She lifted it carefully. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, lay a framed oil painting. Mountains at dusk, the brushstrokes deep and layered. The signature in the corner small but deliberate. Even without knowing the art world, she could feel its value. Not just money. Craft. Time. She replaced it gently. Her breathing felt shallow. She moved toward the long table. A large ledger lay open, weighted by a brass paperweight. She lowered the lantern beside it. The pages were filled with columns of precise entries. Acquisition dates, auction houses, authentication certificates, and beside each entry, estimated market value. Her eyes scanned down the final page. At the bottom, written in firm ink, total collection estimated value, $265 million. Lucinda stared at the number. She read it twice. Then a third time. The air seemed thinner suddenly. She reached for the edge of the table to steady herself. $265 million. Her mind tried to place it into context. It refused. She thought of the mattress in the garage, the space heater complaints, the assisted living brochure she had overheard being discussed. Her pulse thudded louder in her ears. Atlas moved closer and pressed against her leg. She rested her hand on his head. "I didn't know," she said aloud, voice barely more than breath. The vault extended farther than she first realized. Along the far wall, gold bars sat stacked within a steel cabinet, each stamped and numbered. Another shelf held velvet-lined cases containing coins older than the country she was born in. Stock certificates bound in protective sleeves filled a drawer beneath the desk. Raymond had not been eccentric. He had been methodical. She moved to the final crate near the corner and lifted its lid. Inside were rolled maps, sealed envelopes, documents with embossed stamps from institutions she recognized even from the news. Everything documented, everything legal, everything protected. Lucinda slowly walked back to the table. She turned the ledger to the final entry. The date was from the previous year. Raymond had updated this before he died. The number remained the same. 265 million. Atlas lay down beside the table now, calm and steady, as if guarding the space. Lucinda sank into the wooden chair. The lantern flame flickered across the stone walls, casting long shadows. Her life above ground had been reduced to a garage mattress and whispered complaints about electricity. And beneath her feet, a fortune hidden in plain sight. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone, from magnitude, from the realization that Raymond had built this quietly for decades. For what? For whom? The answer was printed clearly in the probate letter upstairs. For her. Lucinda lifted the lantern once more and scanned the chamber. Not greed, not chaos. Precision, intent. The grinding mechanism above had sealed the entrance perfectly again once she descended. The floor panel had slid back into place silently. From the outside, the cabin would look untouched. No one would know. She swallowed slowly. Atlas raised his head and looked at her. Waiting. Lucinda stood. She carefully closed the ledger and placed the brass paperweight back on top. She took one last look at the rows of paintings, the gold, the documents. Then she climbed the stone steps. The air warmed gradually as she reached the top. When she stepped back into the main room, the hearth stood solid and ordinary, the pine floor seamless, the mechanism hidden completely. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she reached down and pressed the stone outward. It clicked back into place. The faint hum beneath the floor continued, subtle and steady. The cabin looked the same as it had an hour ago, but nothing felt the same. Lucinda walked slowly to the window and looked out at the clearing. The trees stood unchanged, the sky pale and wide. Atlas moved beside her and leaned gently into her leg. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply stood there, breathing, aware that the ground beneath her feet now held more than wood and stone. It held a secret large enough to change everything. And she was the only one who knew. The thought settled heavily in Lucinda's chest. She didn't move for a long time. The clearing outside remained quiet, untouched by the magnitude hidden beneath the floorboards. Atlas broke the stillness first. He stepped away from the window and returned to the hearth. Not scratching now, not alert. Satisfied. Lucinda walked back to the fireplace and lowered herself carefully to her knees. She pressed the stone again. The mechanism responded instantly, as if it recognized her. The floor shifted open. She descended once more, slower this time. The air below felt less shocking now. Still cool, still deliberate, but no longer unreal. Atlas followed without hesitation. Lucinda moved straight to the long table at the center of the chamber. She hadn't looked through everything yet. In her initial shock, she had scanned the numbers, the names, the scale, but she hadn't examined the personal details. On the far edge of the table lay a sealed envelope, thick and slightly yellowed with age. Her name was written across the front in steady, precise handwriting. Lucinda Hale. No misses. No formal tone, just her name. She ran her finger along the edge before breaking the seal. Inside was a letter, handwritten across several pages. The date at the top read, October 12th, 1994. 30 years ago. She began to read. Lucinda, if you are reading this, then you have found what I built. I imagine you are surprised, perhaps overwhelmed. That is natural. She swallowed and continued. I have watched you for many years. Not closely enough to intrude, but carefully enough to understand. You were never the loudest person in a room, never the one demanding attention. But you were the one setting the table before anyone else thought to. The one staying late to wash dishes while others drifted away. She blinked. Memories flickered. Thanksgiving dinners, folding chairs, folding. Raymond standing near the back of the room, quiet, observing. He had noticed. The letter continued. I also watched your children. Forgive the bluntness, but I learned long ago that character reveals itself early. Entitlement has a tone. It grows if unchallenged. I saw that tone. I saw it strengthen. Lucinda's chest tightened. This was written decades before Martin passed, before the trust papers, before the garage. I feared what would happen when you were no longer protected by your husband's presence. I feared you would give until there was nothing left, and those around you would accept that as natural. Her hand trembled slightly. That is why I made arrangements. If any immediate family member contests this inheritance, if any legal action is filed to question your competence or claim rights to this estate, they are permanently barred from any access to its contents. The trust documents ensure this cannot be undone. Lucinda lowered the page. Raymond had anticipated it. The possibility of challenge, of pressure, of coercion. Atlas lay down beside her chair, resting his head against her boot. Calm. The final page was shorter. You may wonder why I did not leave this to my own children. The answer is simple. They learned to take. You learned to endure. I believe endurance is more deserving of protection. Use this wisely. Or do not. It is yours without condition. But do not surrender it to those who would mistake generosity for weakness. Raymond Hale. Lucinda sat in silence. The hum of the climate system filled the chamber faintly. Steady. Controlled. She read the letter again. He had seen her. Not in passing. Not casually. He had observed her over decades. Her quiet compliance. Her habit of stepping aside. Her instinct to give. And he had built a fortress beneath a cabin in Montana because of it. Atlas shifted and rested his chin on her knee. The tension that had followed him for weeks, the alertness, the insistence at the hearth, had faded. He lay there peacefully, as if the mission was complete. Lucinda folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest for a moment. Vindication did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy. Raymond had predicted her children's behavior before it happened. That meant he had seen something she hadn't wanted to see. She thought of Derek in the garage doorway, of Brianna calculating electric bills, of the assisted living discussion spoken as if she were not present. Raymond had written this before any of that had occurred. Her throat tightened. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She felt something closer to sorrow, for the distance between what family should be and what it had become. Lucinda rose slowly and walked once more around the chamber. The art, the gold, the investments, all of it documented meticulously. All of it shielded legally from the very challenge Raymond had described. She understood now. This wasn't just wealth. It was armor. Atlas stood and stretched. Lucinda climbed the stairs with the letter in her hand. The floor panel sealed itself seamlessly above her once more. The cabin looked unchanged. The fire in the hearth had burned low. Afternoon light slanted through the windows. She sat at the wooden table and read the letter again. Outside, Wind brushed the pines gently. She placed the letter inside one of the leather-bound ledgers on the shelf near the fireplace. Not hidden, not displayed. Kept. Atlas approached and rested his head against her thigh. She stroked his ears absent-mindedly. "He knew," she said softly. Atlas blinked once. The cabin felt different now. Not just shelter, not just quiet, purposeful. Lucinda stood and walked to the window. 47 acres of trees stretched beyond her sightline. The world out there had not changed, but her understanding had. Raymond had not acted out of impulse. He had acted out of foresight. And she had been chosen not for wealth, but for restraint. That realization settled deeper than the number in the ledger. Atlas remained calm now. No pacing, no watchfulness toward the hearth. The secret beneath the stone had been uncovered, and the truth within the letter had clarified why. Lucinda exhaled slowly. She was not alone in this decision. Raymond had prepared her for the storm before it ever arrived. She just didn't know yet how soon that storm would begin. It started quietly. 3 days after she read Raymond's letter, Lucinda drove into Derby to open a small local bank account. She needed somewhere nearby to deposit the travel funds that had come through probate, and she wanted a place she could walk into if something went wrong. The bank was modest. 2 teller windows, a coffee station with powdered creamer. The manager, a woman named Carol with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, shook her hand warmly. "You're Raymond Hale's cousin," Carol said. "He kept to himself, but he paid his property taxes early every year. Quiet man." Lucinda nodded. "Yes, I'm still learning about him." Carol glanced at the paperwork. "There's more tied to his estate than just the cabin, you know. We've had inquiries from larger institutions." Lucinda kept her face neutral. "I imagine so." She signed the necessary forms and left without elaborating. But word had moved faster than she expected. Small towns functioned on observation, on whispers, on careful curiosity. And somewhere between that bank visit and a phone call placed to Raymond's attorney in Hamilton, a ripple began spreading outward. It reached Arizona by the end of the week. Lucinda was stacking kindling beside the hearth when her phone rang. She had not turned it off. She had simply stopped checking it. The screen read Derek. Atlas lifted his head immediately. She let it ring twice more before answering. "Hello?" "Mom." His voice carried no warmth. "What are you doing up there?" he asked. "Living." There was a sharp exhale. "We got a call. Some probate office. Something about assets. Why didn't you tell us?" Lucinda remained quiet. "Mom, this isn't funny. They said the estate is complicated, that there are holdings, significant holdings." The word significant sounded forced. She thought of the ledger beneath her floor. "I haven't had time to sort through everything," she replied. "You inherited millions, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Atlas stood now, ears forward. Lucinda stared at the hearth. "It's Raymond's estate," she said calmly. "He left it to me." Silence on the line. "You can't manage something like that," Derek said finally. "You're alone out there. You don't even know what you're doing." "I know enough." "That's not good enough." The line went dead. The next morning, a dark SUV pulled into the clearing without warning. Gravel spit beneath expensive tires. Lucinda was standing on the porch when Derek stepped out. Marissa followed from the passenger side, sunglasses perched high on her head. Lucinda hadn't seen her daughter in nearly a year. Neither of them waved. Atlas moved to Lucinda's side instantly, his body aligned with hers, shoulder touching her leg. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Derek shut the SUV door harder than necessary. "You didn't answer my calls." "You hung up." Marissa stepped forward, her smile thin. "Mom, what is this about? We're getting notices from lawyers, from banks. You're making major financial decisions without consulting anyone." Lucinda descended the porch steps slowly. "This was left to me." "Exactly," Derek snapped. "To you. Which means we have to make sure you're protected." "Protected from what?" "From being manipulated," Marissa said quickly. "From making mistakes. Mom, you're 72. Atlas let out a low, warning rumble. Derek glanced down at him. "Control your dog." Lucinda placed her hand on Atlas's back. "I am not being manipulated," she said evenly. Derek pulled a folder from under his arm. "We filed for emergency guardianship," he said. The words landed hard. Lucinda blinked. "You did what?" "You're isolated. You've made drastic financial moves. The court will see that you need oversight." "Oversight," she repeated. "For your own good," Marissa added. Lucinda felt the cold air against her face. The pines swayed gently overhead. "You're trying to take control," she said quietly. "We're trying to protect the family's interest." There it was. Not her. The family's interest. Atlas stepped forward one pace, positioning himself between Lucinda and her children. Derek's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're being paranoid." "I haven't accused you of anything," Lucinda replied. "You came here." Marissa crossed her arms. "You don't think we deserve transparency?" "Transparency," Lucinda said, her voice steady, "is not the same as entitlement." For a moment, none of them spoke. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of pine needles and melting snow. Derek glanced toward the cabin door. "Where are the documents?" Lucinda didn't answer. He took a step toward the porch. Atlas barked sharply. The sound cut through the clearing like a crack of thunder. Derek stopped. Lucinda felt her pulse rise, but her voice remained calm. "You are not going inside." Derek stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're really going to do this?" he asked. "You're going to shut your own children out?" Lucinda met his eyes. "I'm going to protect what was left to me." Marissa's expression shifted from irritation to calculation. "This isn't over," she said quietly. Derek nodded. "We'll see you in court." They turned and climbed back into the SUV. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as they reversed too quickly and sped back down the dirt road. Silence returned, but it felt thinner now. Atlas remained rigid for several seconds before relaxing slightly. Lucinda stood very still. The guardianship petition would arrive officially within days. Raymond had predicted this. That knowledge steadied her more than she expected. 3 nights later, the storm intensified. Lucinda returned from town to find the cabin door slightly ajar. Her stomach dropped. Atlas moved ahead of her instantly, muscles tight. She pushed the door open fully. Inside, drawers had been pulled out. Papers scattered across the table. The leather armchair shifted out of place. Not vandalism. Searching. Atlas moved from room to room, checking corners, sniffing for unfamiliar scent. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing valuable above ground had been touched. Lucinda walked slowly to the hearth. The floor remained seamless, untouched. She exhaled shakily. Whoever had entered hadn't known. Not yet. She stepped outside and called the sheriff. Within 20 minutes, a patrol truck clamped the dirt road. Sheriff Colton Reeves stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-50s, he removed his hat respectfully. "You must be Lucinda Hale," he said. "Raymond spoke highly of you." She swallowed. "I wish I had known him better." Colton surveyed the cabin interior carefully. "Doesn't look random," he said. "Looks like someone was after paperwork." Lucinda didn't mention the vault. She simply nodded. "Your children were in town earlier this week," Colton added quietly. "Asking questions." Lucinda met his gaze. "I imagine they'll keep asking." Colton's eyes softened slightly. "Raymond paid this county's school taxes anonymously for 15 years, he said. When the roof leaked, he fixed it. Quietly. You won't be alone out here." Lucinda felt something steady beneath the fear. She wasn't isolated. Not entirely. Colton took notes, then stood by the door. "I'll increase patrols. If they come back unannounced, you call me immediately." Atlas stepped forward and sniffed the sheriff's hand briefly. Colton smiled faintly. "Good dog." When the patrol truck disappeared down the road, the cabin felt both more vulnerable and more fortified at the same time. Lucinda closed the door and locked it carefully. She stood before the hearth once more. The stone remained solid, silent. Raymond had built protection into more than paperwork. He had anticipated this storm. Lucinda ran her fingers along the mantel. "They smell blood," she whispered softly. Atlas looked up at her. Outside, wind gathered strength in the trees. The storm had arrived, and this time, she would not be the one pushed into the garage. The official papers of Chapter 2 days later. A sheriff's deputy delivered them mid-morning, hat tipped politely, expression neutral. Atlas stood close but did not bark. Lucinda signed for the envelope and watched the patrol truck disappear down the road before opening it. Petition for emergency guardianship, filed by Derek Hale and Marissa Holt. Grounds, isolation, diminished capacity, financial vulnerability. She read each line slowly, calmly. Her hands did not shake this time. Raymond had predicted this. That knowledge steadied her like a hand on her shoulder. By afternoon, she was on the phone with the estate attorney in Hamilton. His name was Andrew Callahan, late 40s, direct voice, efficient. "I was waiting for this," Andrew said after she explained the situation. "Your cousin included a sealed affidavit specifically for a challenge like this." She exhaled softly. "I read the letter." "That's not the only protection he left you," Andrew replied. "The trust structure is ironclad, but we'll still have to appear in court. They're framing it as concern." Lucinda let that word settle. Concern. "Will I have to testify?" she asked. "Yes," Andrew said, "but you won't be alone." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later at the county courthouse in Hamilton. The night before, Lucinda stood on the porch watching low clouds gather over the mountains. Atlas sat beside her, posture tall and steady. "I won't run," she murmured. Atlas's tail thumped once against the wooden boards. The courthouse was smaller than she expected. Stone facade, narrow windows, American flags snapping gently in the spring wind. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper. Derek stood near the water fountain when she arrived. Marissa beside him. Both dressed carefully. controlled. They did not greet her. Atlas remained outside with Sheriff Colton Reeves, who had insisted on driving her into town that morning. Inside the courtroom, Andrew Callahan stood near the front table, reviewing documents. He nodded once as Lucinda took her seat beside him. Across the aisle, Derek's attorney, sharp suit, crisp posture, whispered something to Marissa. The judge entered promptly at 9. Case 18-472, Petition for Guardianship. Derek Hale and Marissa Holt versus Lucinda Hale. The words felt formal, clinical. Andrew stood first. Your Honor, he began, this petition alleges diminished capacity and vulnerability. We will demonstrate that Mrs. Hale is competent, informed, and acting within her legal rights as sole beneficiary of Raymond Hale's estate. Derek's attorney rose. Your Honor, our concern is simple. Mrs. Hale has relocated to a remote area, assumed control of substantial assets, and cut off family communication. These are indicators of potential manipulation or cognitive decline. Lucinda listened without flinching. Andrew placed several documents before the judge. Independent cognitive evaluations completed last week, he said. Mrs. Hale scores well above threshold for competency. No signs of impairment. The judge reviewed the papers carefully. Derek's attorney shifted tactics. She has been isolated, he pressed, living alone in a mountainous region. Large financial decisions require oversight. Lucinda felt a flicker of irritation. Isolation had been forced on her long before Montana. Andrew nodded once. Your Honor, Raymond Hale anticipated this possibility. May I introduce the sealed affidavit? The judge looked up. Proceed? Andrew handed over a notarized envelope. The seal had remained intact for decades. The judge broke it open. Silence settled across the room as she read. Her expression shifted slowly from neutral to contemplative. After several minutes, she began to read aloud. To any court reviewing a challenge to my estate, I, Raymond Hale, attest that Lucinda Hale is my sole chosen beneficiary. I make this decision with full awareness of her character and the predictable behavior of her immediate family. Lucinda felt the air shift in the room. The judge continued. If any of her children attempt to contest this inheritance or claim guardianship, it confirms my concerns regarding their motives. Such actions shall permanently disqualify them from any interest in my estate under the trust's provisions. Derek's attorney stiffened. Marissa's face drained slightly of color. The judge lowered the paper. This affidavit predates the current dispute by nearly 30 years, she said evenly. It is detailed. It anticipates this specific scenario. Andrew spoke calmly. The trust contains a forfeiture clause tied directly to any legal challenge. The judge nodded. To clarify, she said, looking toward Derek's counsel, if I were to grant this petition, it would invalidate your client's access entirely under the estate's structure. A brief pause. That appears to be the case, Your Honor, Derek's attorney admitted. The courtroom remained quiet. The judge turned her attention to Lucinda. Mrs. Hale, do you understand the assets under your control? Yes, Lucinda replied steadily. Do you understand the legal and financial implications of managing them? Yes. Are you under duress or influence from any outside party? No. The judge held her gaze a moment longer. You appear composed and informed. Lucinda inclined her head slightly. The judge shifted in her chair. This court finds no evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. The gavel struck once, a sharp, final sound. And given the clear protective language within the trust, the petitioners are ordered to cover Mrs. Hale's legal expenses. The air in the room changed. Derek's shoulders tensed visibly. Marissa looked away. Lucinda did not smile. She simply breathed. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Reeves waited beside Atlas. The dog's ears lifted when he saw her. She stepped down the stone stairs slowly. "It's done," Andrew said quietly beside her. Lucinda nodded. Atlas pressed against her leg, sensing the shift. Derek passed without speaking, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Marissa followed, avoiding eye contact. The SUV door slammed. Gravel crunched, and they were gone. Lucinda stood there a long moment beneath the open Montana sky. The storm had broken, and it had not carried her away. She rested her hand on Atlas's back. The wind moved softly through the trees beyond the courthouse. For the first time since the garage, she felt something clear. Not anger, not vindication. Clarity. The vault beneath her cabin was still sealed, untouched, protected. And so was she. The drive back to the cabin felt different. Not lighter exactly, but steadier. The mountains stood where they always had. The sky stretched wide and pale above the highway. Atlas rested his head on the edge of the passenger seat, eyes half closed, finally calm in a way she hadn't seen since they left Arizona. When they reached the clearing, Lucinda stepped out of the truck and paused. The cabin looked unchanged. Log walls weathered and strong, the stone chimney solid against the late afternoon light. Everything outwardly ordinary. Beneath it, extraordinary. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air carried the faint scent of pine and ash. The hearth stood quiet, seamless, guarding its secret. Lucinda walked slowly to the fireplace and rested her palm against the stone. "Still ours," she whispered. Atlas circled once and lay down near the window, watching the clearing as he always did. In the weeks that followed, Lucinda did not rush. She met with Andrew Callahan and a financial advisor in Hamilton. Quiet meetings, detailed plans, careful structure. She sold a small portion of the portfolio, strategically, discreetly, enough to create a foundation, enough to build something. The cabin remained her home, but the land began to change. At first, it was just a cleared section near the southern edge of the property. Trees removed carefully, soil leveled. Then came blueprints, small cottages, modest, one-bedroom units with wide porches and accessible entrances, warm wood siding to match the cabin. Sheriff Reeves visited one afternoon and leaned against the porch railing as construction began. "You're really doing this," he said. Lucinda nodded. "There are more people like me than anyone wants to admit." He understood without asking for details. Within 6 months, 3 cottages stood completed. By the end of the year, there were 7. Lucinda called it the Hale Ridge Retreat. Not a shelter, not a charity. A place for seniors who had been financially exploited by family members. People pushed into corners. People told they were burdens. The first woman arrived in early autumn. Her name was Helen. 74. Thin. Careful with her words. Her son had drained her savings through joint accounts and left her in a motel room when the funds ran dry. Lucinda met her at the porch. "You're safe here," she said simply. Atlas approached Helen slowly, tail low and relaxed. He sniffed her hand once, then leaned gently against her leg. Helen's eyes filled before she could stop it. Word spread quietly through legal aid networks and senior advocacy groups. Lucinda funded a small legal clinic out of the main cabin's lower room. Volunteer attorneys traveled from Missoula twice a month. She never spoke publicly about the vault. The money flowed carefully, invisibly, into protection. Atlas became part of the rhythm. He walked the paths between cottages each morning, sat in on counseling sessions, lay at the feet of residents during quiet evenings when memories grew heavy. Children faded. Derek sent one final email after the court ruling. It was brief, accusatory. It received no reply. Marissa called once, voice tight, asking if there was any way to repair this. Lucinda answered politely. Repair requires both sides to recognize damage. The call ended quickly. 2 years passed. The retreat expanded to 15 cottages. A small community center rose near the original cabin, built from timber harvested on the property. It held a common kitchen, a library, and a sunlit room with wide windows facing the mountains. Atlas's muzzle began to gray. He moved a little slower now, but he still positioned himself between Lucinda and any raised voice. One evening, as autumn painted the trees gold and red, a pickup truck rolled slowly into the clearing. Lucinda recognized it immediately. Derek stepped out. He looked older, thinner, less certain. Atlas stood but did not bark. Lucinda walked down from the porch to meet him halfway. "I'm not here for money," Derek said before she could speak. She waited. "I was wrong," he added quietly. The words hung in the cold air. He looked past her toward the cottages, toward the residents walking slowly along the gravel path. "You built all this," he said. "Yes," he swallowed. "I thought you were being stubborn, that you were pushing us away. I didn't see what we were doing." Lucinda studied his face. The entitlement had dulled. The edge softened. She did not step forward, but she did not step back either. "You made choices," she said gently. "I know." Silence stretched between them. "I don't expect forgiveness," Derek said finally. "I just needed to say it." Lucinda nodded once. "That's a start." He left shortly after. Not embraced, not rejected, simply acknowledged. That night, Lucinda stood on the porch with Atlas beside her. The sky shimmered with stars. The cottages glowed softly in the darkness, each one holding someone rebuilding their life. She thought of the garage with no windows, of the thin mattress, of the quiet shutting down inside her when she overheard the assisted living plan. Raymond had built a vault of stone and steel beneath a cabin, but what he had truly given her was something else. Protection, yes. Resources, certainly. But also the chance to choose differently. To build instead of retreat. To create shelter instead of surrender. Atlas pressed against her leg, his breathing slow and steady. She looked down at him, brushing her fingers through the fur at his neck. "Good boy," she murmured. Blood had not guaranteed loyalty. Wealth had not guaranteed love. But integrity, recognized, protected, and acted upon, had become a fortress. And standing there, beneath the Montana sky, Lucinda understood something fully at last. No one would ever push her into the dark again. Not while she had built her own light. Atlas rested his head against her knee. The wind moved gently through the pines.
and the cabin strong, breathing, watchful stood exactly where it had always been. Lucinda stayed on the porch long after the wind quieted. Alas leaned into her leg, his weight heavy now, his muscles silver with years. He had found the stone when she would have walked past it. He had held his brow when she might to find it. He had listened for danger in places she was too tired to hear it. Below them, porches lie low from the cottage. Helen was laughing with someone over tea. A man who arrived with nothing but a duffel bag was fishing a loose growling. Like it mattered, the place fell leaf in earth. She talked about the wretched with the windows, how small she had made herself back then, how easy it was to believe you asking for too much just by wanting a door that closes. Raymond saw it, Alice sent it, and somewhere between stone and silence, she finally did too. Not every inheritance comes in gold bars. Sometimes it's locked door, sometimes it's a dog who wants to move from the hearth until you look closer. She bent and raised her forehead to Atlas. If someone you trusted built a fortress beneath your feet, would you have the courage to stand on it?